And now, stand-up community subscribers and listeners from around the globe, it's time to Stand Up with Pete Dominic, where we ask you the important questions that impact you, your family, and your community, such as, I lost my wallet, but do I really need it if I can just use Apple Pay for everything? And why do people wear masks when they're in a car alone? And also, underwear. And now, the podcast host who spends about 8 hours a day working in a shed that used to be filled with tools and is now filled with dreams, Pete Dominic. All right, well, obviously Pete Co is off, and that was rough. I apologize. There is only one Pete Co, but he is unfortunately unable to get to the opening and news dump today. And I said to him, well, what do I pay you for? You're fired. And he said, okay, but can I still pay you? Thank you, Pete, for being not only a subscriber, but a contributor. I love you, buddy. Joining me on today's show, it's been far too long since I checked in with John Avlon at CNN. He and I had a great conversation, as did Eric Segall, who I just called and opened the mic, and he ranted, and then at 25 minutes I had a technical difficulty and again had to end it. But it was an awesome conversation. John Avlon, Eric Segall coming up. Go follow him on Twitter at PeteCoVO. That's COEVO. And John Carroll playing us in, as always, the great John Carroll, JD Carroll 88. Thank you both. Thank you for tuning in, for downloading, for rating the podcast, and for subscribing to it. Welcome to the new subscribers, a couple people joining today, a couple other people upgrading, or as they say, editing their pledge up. Thank you guys very, very much. Welcome aboard. Rhonda, thank you for upgrading your pledge from $5 to $10. Welcome to Brian Zito. My apologies to anybody who I haven't given shout-outs for new subscribers or for folks upgrading their subscriptions. I love you and thank you. Jody Marie Miller sent a great comment. She is a very generous subscriber, $25 subscription. Hi, Jody. She sent a great message to me yesterday. She said, I'm listening to have a question, one concern. I keep hearing in my area near a military base housing refugees about the mandate. It's not the mandate that's the problem. It's the fact that the supply of FDA-approved shot is not available. Also, we're being told that our guests are not being mandated, and that doesn't seem fair either. So my question is, why is our federal employees having their jobs threatened if the approved vaccine is not available? And Jody, I don't have an answer for you yet, but I bring this up to let you know that if you reach out to me and email me a great question like that or illustrate a concern in your community, I will try to get to the bottom of it by asking a smart person that answer. So I'm in touch with Jody. We're going to try to talk over the next couple of days to try to get to the bottom of that. Also, excited to finally meet subscriber who lives in my community, Pete Diamond. Looks like that's going to happen later today. You're listening on Tuesday. And one more listener feedback from Phil Round out in Wyoming. Hey, Phil. He wrote to me about yesterday's show about Anya Kamenetz. He said, she's great, but she said that this vaccine is new and we're still learning about it, and that strikes me as a bit of an irresponsible statement. There's over 500 million doses administered, virtually no issues with anyone who's gotten the shot. What's to learn? FDA took their time getting it officially approved, so now it's done. No one's learning anything about the vaccine unless they are one of the very elite research virologists on the planet. To make the statement for general consumption that we're still learning about it fuels skepticism and feeds anti-vaxxers the info they crave. She's really careful thinker and speaker, but that seemed to be a lapse on her part. I was prepared for you to call her out on it, but perhaps you're being polite. Now, I think I just missed it, Phil, but I think that's a fair point. I think Anya would probably agree, but I appreciate that. I appreciate how closely you guys listen, how you nitpick about important things, because that's super important to me and to everybody else, trying to get it as right, whatever right means. So I appreciate all the feedback, good, bad, criticism, compliments. Send it my way, standupwithpete@gmail.com. Okay, so if you aren't a subscriber, sign up now. And if you are, thank you very much. I'll see you Thursday night at the Hangout. It was so great last Thursday. It's going to be hard to top that. I spent Monday night with the local Democrats trying to organize and help get Democrats elected in my local community. If you're not part of a local community organization, whether it be political or otherwise, let me know why not, and what you're doing. I've heard from a lot of listeners who've been very involved in local politics for a long time, including Carl Halterman yesterday. Carl, great to hear from you. So did that last night. I'm out here late trying to get the podcast wrapped up now, which I'm happy to do because I've got a bunch of things to play for you here. Well, not as much as maybe most days. There's a lot of audio out of the hearing from the Secretary of State, Anthony Blinken, where Republicans attacked him over and over, demanded his resignation. It was pretty ugly. I will grab this one clip for you, but let's get to it now. It's time for the last 24. I almost forgot to say that. I'm so thrown that I don't have a Pete Co intro. I don't know what I'm doing. Okay, so just this one clip from the Secretary of State, Anthony Blinken, in front of the House. I forget which committee, Homeland Security, maybe. Anyway, remember Joe Wilson, old Joe Wilson, who screamed out, "You lie," to Barack Obama, President Obama, at his State of the Union speech? Well, he's unfortunately still a congressman, and he demanded that he was just an asshole to the Secretary of State, and he demanded that he resign. But I loved Congressman Jerry Connolly, who followed up with this. Here's the whole thing. Well, the end of Joe Wilson and then Connolly's response. Congressman Connolly.
You should resign. I yield back.
Mr. Secretary, we only had 43 seconds left of the 5 minutes, so your response, I know you will not be able to answer many of the questions that was put forward by Representative Wilson, but if you choose, you have 43 seconds of which to respond for whichever questions were asked to you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let me simply thank the member for his support for the men and women of the State Department. I appreciated that part of the statement. Thank you.
I now recognize Representative Jerry Connolly of Virginia, who's the president of the NATO Parliamentarian Assembly, for 5 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. I guess I would say to my friend from South Carolina, if I were the member of Congress who committed one of the most grievous acts in a State of the Union address when the President of the United States, Mr. Obama, was our guest, to shout out, "You lie," I might take more care about enumerating other alleged lies in a hearing with the Secretary of State.
Our friend Aaron David Miller recapped it. 2 hours into the Blinken hearings on Afghanistan, few fireworks, Democrats supportive, Republicans unfocused for the most part, minus Joe Wilson calling for Blinken's resignation, quite mild. Blinken more than holding his own. America has moved on. Inside the Beltway, not quite. That's his analysis, although I think he tweeted that before. Some fireworks did start with Republican Congressman Brian Mast, who's an epic asshole, and I think a few others as well. Moving on, speaking of assholes, this guy Larry Elder, who is, I guess, the front runner to unseat Gavin Newsom in today's California recall election, for some reason gave an interview to MSNBC's Jacob Soboroff. And I say for some reason because I'm not sure what he was hoping to gain out of it. Soboroff is going to ask him tough questions, but this is pretty much par for the course. This is where certainly Republicans are at now. They are not going to accept the outcome of elections, even when they're completely legitimate and there's nothing wrong or nothing scandalous at all about them. And that is, I think, one of the biggest threats to democracy. But here is Larry Elder with Jacob Soboroff on MSNBC yesterday.
Whether or not you win or lose, will you accept the results of the election tomorrow?
I think we all ought to be looking at election integrity, no matter whether you're a Democrat, an independent, or a Republican.
Is that a commitment to accept the results of the election tomorrow?
Let's all do that together. Let's all work together on both sides of the aisle to make sure that the election is a fair election.
Is that a commitment to accept the results of the election tomorrow?
Let's all work together to find out whether or not the election tomorrow is a fair election. Let's all work together to do that.
So that is not a commitment to accept the results of the election tomorrow?
Boy, Jacob, honestly, I answered your question. Let's all work together. We all should have a vested interest in making sure that the election is a fair one and is one that was conducted with integrity.
Not only, Nicole, is that not a commitment to honor the results of the election come tomorrow, page out of the Trump playbook, but it's devoid of any specifics about what might be wrong with the election process. And just take it from me firsthand, who spent time inside the Los Angeles County mail-in ballot processing center, not just the largest election jurisdiction in California, but the largest election jurisdiction in the country. They are matching each and every signature automatically in that facility. Signatures that don't match are kicked over for a manual look by election workers inside that facility. There will be hundreds, if not thousands, of election workers making sure that the integrity of this election is upheld come tomorrow. And by the way, over the course of the past several weeks, while people have been voting early, look, there are really legitimate issues out here. You mentioned wildfires. COVID is a huge one. Economic inequality is worse in this state than anywhere else across the country. Really legitimate things to talk about in the recall election. Whether or not the election is going to be secure based on the facts is not one of them.
All right, great job to MSNBC's Jacob Soboroff. Great report. Really hoping at the end of the day, Gavin Newsom is still the governor of California. My biggest concern out there is what happens with climate, not to mention race and all these other issues. Democracy. I mean, the idea that Republicans are just going to continue to not accept the result of elections, even though they have no proof that there was anything wrong with the elections, certainly one of the scariest and most concerning developments in our politics, right out of the Trump playbook. He started that, and a lot of people taking that one from him, of course. All right. Well, as you'll see, there's no real through line, a theme with today's clips. I'm just jumping all over the place, but I really liked this moment from the Bulwark podcast with Charlie Sykes, who was talking to Tom Nichols and just went off. These guys are both conservatives, former Republicans, I guess. And he just went off on Chris Christie, who I went off on yesterday for his shitty, stupid life comments on ABC's This Week, and as well as pretty much throughout his career. Here it is.
So my attitude, and I'm working through this in real time, is basically if I was in the room with Chris Christie, the conversation would go something like, Governor Christie, fuck you and everything you did. But having said that, have a seat. I'm listening, and I'm going to watch. Okay,
right.
I'd have to vent. I'd have to blow off the steam. Like, you asked, what the fuck did you think was going to happen? What were you doing standing there? You know, I mean, are you embarrassed by that? Or, you know, we'd have to have that sort of like little cathartic moment. But then I go, okay, I'm listening. Give it your best shot. If you don't fold, you know. Because to a certain extent, look, Liz Cheney and Adam Kinzinger, they voted for Donald Trump to be reelected, to get another term. And yet, you got to take the deep breath and go, all right, you don't get to always choose the army you go to war with, right, Professor?
Well, that one was just really satisfying, so I wanted to share that with you. Yesterday, major controversy breaking out on social media between Nicki Minaj, who has 22 million followers. I guess she's a singer, right? And MSNBC's Joy Reid, who really let her have it. Nicki Minaj tweeting that our cousin in Trinidad won't get the vaccine because his friend got it and became impotent, she said, to her 22 million followers. She continued, she wrote, his testicles became swollen. His friend was weeks away from getting married. Now the girl called off the wedding. So just pray on it and make sure you're comfortable with your decision and not bullied. And apparently she's not vaccinated herself. Anyway, here is Joy Reid at the very end of her show responding with a stinging reprimand over the tweets from Nicki Minaj.
In the end, I'm done hand-holding people, too. I've reached my limit, okay? I've reached my limit. I'm not begging anyone else. We're out of time, so I'm sorry. I was about to ask you a question, but I can't. And people like Nicki Minaj, I have to say this. You have a platform, sister, that is 22 million followers, okay? I have 2 million followers. You have 22 million followers on Twitter. For you to use your platform to encourage our community to not protect themselves and save their lives, my God, sister, you could do better than that. You got that platform. It's a blessing. It's a blessing that you got that people listen to you. And they listen to you more than they listen to me. For you to use your platform to put people in the position of dying from a disease they don't have to die from, oh, my God. As a fan, as a hip-hop fan, as somebody who is your fan, I'm so sad that you did that. So sad that you did that, sister. Oh, my God. Anyway.
How about that? Nicki Minaj responded to that tweet, quoting that clip that was put out, She wrote, "This is what happens when you're so thirsty to down another black woman by the request of the white man that you didn't bother to read all my tweets. My God, sister, do better. Imagine getting your dumbass on TV a minute after a tweet to spread a false narrative about a black woman. Yikes." Well, folks, rest easy because yours truly weighed in. A lot of people on Twitter and around social media were waiting to hear my response to these two black women arguing on Twitter. So what I wrote, was, for the record, Joy Reid has done more for black women and black people than almost any other black person in media. She fought the white man till he left the house, and they brought in a black woman to run it. Yeah, I mean, I'm behind the scenes stuff, and I can tell you that, you know, Phil Griffin was the white man. That was the guy who was the president of MSNBC, and he's gone, and they brought in a black woman now has the job. Her name is Rashida Jones. She's the president now of MSNBC. And, you know, Joy has done so much to open the doors for black folks at MSNBC and media. And it's just, that's ugly and that's disappointing. But I am on Team Reid. How about you? Also, I did see my friend Julia Yaffe tweeted that she got 2 doses of the Pfizer vaccine, and weirdly, her testicles did not swell, and I responded to that. My nuts actually got smaller. If that was even possible. That said, I did the Moderna juice. I drank the Moderna juice. Okay, well, moving on. Let's move on to another celebrity friend of mine. Yesterday, I got out of the blue. I got a text from Jim Breuer. Seriously, I just got a text that said, "Fuck your shot." I mean, I haven't talked to Jim in a couple of years, I don't think, but go way back with him before even SiriusXM. I met him doing comedy, and then we worked together at Sirius and always admired him a great deal. But apparently Jim is a big anti-vaxxer, and he texted me basically telling me that he knows people who had terrible side effects as a result of getting the vaccine. And I was like, well, I didn't really argue with him. I was like, whatever, dude, I love you, but obviously we disagree on this. And he then went public. You know, I wouldn't have shared that with you if he didn't go public. But yeah, he went public. He canceled shows because they were mandating vaccines, unlike most comedians and performers who are insisting folks get vaccinated. Anyway, here is a report from a New Jersey news station about that, including a little bit of Jim's video or comments from his Facebook Live about it.
Jersey-based comedian Jim Breuer is canceling a December show at Montclair's Wellmont Theater due to the theater's vaccination policy. In a Facebook Live, Breuer, who lives in Chester, said he will not do the December 3rd show, among other performances, due to what he's calling segregation by the theaters.
I have to stick to my morals. I have to stick to what I know is right. As a human to another human, when you have to be forced, bribed, dictated, which is basically what's going on, I will not do a show where they force you to come out and laugh. And the only way you can do that is that you need to get a shot? No. Or you got to go no.
And many performers have taken the opposite approach and will not take the stage unless audiences are vaccinated. That includes comedian Patton Oswalt and the band Fish, who performed in Atlantic City last month.
It's an interesting bet if you take the seriousness of it away. It's an interesting bet in terms of will more people support Jim Breuer or will more of his fans not support him. A lot of people are making fun of Breuer, saying they hadn't heard of him for years. He's an amazing live performer. I mean, he's one of my favorite people to watch live. But I'm super disappointed, obviously, in what he's doing and saying here. But I'm sure he believes it. I know he believes it. So there you go. I don't know what else to say about that other than how disappointed I am. And maybe I'll get him on to talk about it all. Or not. I don't know. All right. Well, Rachel Maddow last night on her show, I thought did a really good job here talking about this poor guy and his family who died because he couldn't get into a hospital and went to like 40 hospitals. And you probably heard about the story, tragic story. And here she is talking about her that family's response and giving her own opinion, a spin on it, which I think is really good about the whole personal decision. Getting a vaccine is a personal decision. Is it?
When Mr. Demonia's family published their own obituary of him, they included this at the end. Quote, "In honor of Ray, please get vaccinated if you have not." In an effort to free up resources for non-COVID related emergencies. Due to COVID-19, Coleman Regional Medical Center emergency staff contacted 43 hospitals in 3 states in search of a cardiac ICU bed and finally located one in Meridian, Mississippi. He would not want any other family to go through what his did. I mean, for everyone who says that getting a vaccine is a personal choice that doesn't affect anyone else, line that up with Ray Demonia's obituary and what his family has just said about his death, right? I mean, your decision about your vaccine may feel personal to you. I get it. But you live in a society, you live in a country, and your decision about your vaccine is ultimately the decision that fills up hospital beds. That makes all the difference to your society, your community, your country. It makes all the difference as to whether a man like Ray Demonia gets that ICU bed or not. Other people's decisions about their vaccine made the decision for him as to whether or not he could get the critical care he needed. His daughter tells the Coleman Tribune, quote, "Dad was a team player, always. He was vaccinated for his own health and everyone else's health. He did everything he was supposed to do."
Yeah, good stuff from Rachel Maddow. Ray Demonia was 3 days shy of his 74th birthday, well known in his native Coleman, Alabama, according to his family. Okay, well, it is now time for all of the rest of the headlines and what we call the news dump. Here's one of my favorite old classics from Pete Coe.
NRA President Elephant Hunting Chump. We hope he's gored by tusks on today's news dump.
Oh, I love it. Thank you, Pete. All right, let's start with a warning from Apple Computer. The iPhone apparently is not something that should be attached to your motorcycle. Apple warned users last week that attaching iPhones to powerful motorcycles exposes the devices to intense, high-amplitude vibrations that could damage camera systems. Apple advised against attaching iPhones to motorcycles with high power or high volume engine, recommended that people who attach devices to low power vehicles like scooters or mopeds use a vibration dampening mount. So yeah, that's a pretty important issue. And if you have a motorcycle, now you know. Can't say that you didn't. I don't know how I picked that story. In Washington, D.C., the Capitol fencing apparently is going to return before the pro-insurrectionist rally. Police are increasing preparations to prevent another rally, another riot, really, or insurrection, I suppose. The Associated Press, CNN, many others reporting. The rally, by the way, is called the Justice for J6, defending the... Imagine! I mean, it's so crazy. These people are criminal. Do we not? I don't even know where to start with that. But apparently this is happening this coming weekend, this coming Saturday. And speaking of dangerous, insane lunatics, less than a week before this rally scheduled to take place, a man with a bayonet and a machete was arrested near the Democratic National Committee headquarters, according to Capitol Police. Have you seen this story? The guy had a swastika carved into his mirror and an American flag instead of a license plate. That's weird. A swastika and an American flag. They found the weapons when they pulled him over early Monday. 44-year-old guy from California taken into custody on suspicion of possession of illegal weapons, which are long knives illegal in Washington, D.C. So heading off a potential terrorist attack from a potential terrorist. Oh, here's a fun story. Scientists managed to potty train cows. They learned to urinate in a moo-loo. That's what they're calling it, moo-loo. And the discovery is apparently more serious than it sounds. What started apparently a half-in-jest question on a radio talk show about the very real problem of livestock waste resulted in a serious study published in the journal Current Biology. So if you want to know more about that, look up the moo-loo. Moo-loo. Fun to say. Actor Bridges has given an update on his cancer. He has lymphoma, but also has battled COVID, and it was pretty interesting to hear him say that he's in remission, but he's also struggled with COVID earlier this year. And he said now that it's in the rearview mirror, he credits being vaccinated for that. He said he got COVID while in chemo, and it made cancer look like a piece of cake. Speaking of COVID and science, I don't know how good this study is, but the headline is 1 in 7 people have dumped their friends over a COVID vaccine stance. The coronavirus vaccine has been an incredibly divisive topic. Now it's even ending friendships. Vaccinated Americans have called it quits with friends who refuse to get the COVID-19 shot, according to a new poll of 1,000 people. How about you? True of any of your friends, relatives, coworkers? I'd love to hear those stories. And do mandates work? Some places they do. Sometimes they don't, I suppose. But I think overwhelmingly they have in the past and they will in the future, including at Delta Airlines, where they say 4,000 unvaccinated employees got shots after a surcharge announcement. So Delta Airlines announced last week that unvaccinated employees who got inoculated after the company announced that it was adding a $200 monthly surcharge on its health care plan for employees who are not vaccinated. So that's one way to use a carrot and a stick. The House Ways and Means Committee on Monday released legislation aimed at paying for Democrats' $3.5 trillion in social spending priorities, including by raising the corporate tax rate 26.5%. So I'll have to talk with Maura Quint about that next week. A Colorado pastor who mocked AIDS deaths and spread vaccine conspiracy theories died from COVID-19. Christian radio host Bob Enyart became infamous during his career for reading obituaries from people who died of AIDS while playing the Queen song, Another One Bites the Dust. And now he's the one who's gone. Thoughts and prayers, Bob. In Florida, 2 middle school students were arrested in an alleged school shooting plot who had tried to recruit fellow students to participate, which is a pretty dumb idea. The 2 middle school students were arrested, and in Lee County, Florida, 13 and 14-year-old boy booked on September 11th for attempt, solicitation, and conspiracy to conduct a homicide, according to the report. Terrible story. Glad that they caught them. And if you heard that the White House vaccination policy is exempting United States Postal Service employees, you heard wrong. Those rumors are not true. And finally, in Denmark, they've become one of the first countries in the European Union to ease all of the domestic restrictions that were put in place to control the spread of COVID-19. While here in America, we rank 7th in vaccinations among the wealthiest countries in the world. So I guess we're very exceptional, though. All right, that is your news dump for today, and I am happy now to turn to the final and best part of the show, the guests. Coming up, a conversation with the great Eric Segall. I called him yesterday morning, and he ranted, and it was awesome about Breyer, about Amy Coney Barrett, and more. Always a great conversation with him. But first, I caught up with my friend John Avlon, who I haven't spoken to for a bit. He, of course, former editor-in-chief of the Daily Beast, former speechwriter for Rudy Giuliani, and very, very talented author. He's written books about George Washington. His next book is about Abraham Lincoln, comes out in January. He is a regular daily contributor and anchor at CNN, mostly on New Day, also on reliable sources. Always great to talk with John. He's on Twitter at John Avlon, and I was really happy to get him back on the show. It's been far too long, so here we go right now. Let's do it. All right, welcome back to John Avlon. It's been way too long, but we have been talking, and we caught up not too long ago, and I've missed you in my life and on the show. Thank you for joining me today.
Anytime.
So
what's going on, dude?
Well, listen, there's a pandemic. I don't know if you've covered it at CNN.
I've heard about that. Yes.
I'm continuing to really, really enjoy your reality checks, and I wanted to just talk a little bit about them and just some other things in general. But I guess it would be a waste to not ask you about 20 years since 9/11. I've been trying to kind of avoid it a little bit in my life, and even on the podcast for my own mental health. Plus, there's a lot of really great journalism about it, and you know, I'm not always sure how important a one-on-one interview is, but you know, you were there, you were a speechwriter for the mayor, who was Rudy Giuliani at the time, and I wonder, you know, what your thoughts are 20 years later, and especially given the fact that the war in Afghanistan is over, and it seems like it's just the way it was when it started.
Well, so there's a lot there. I did a trilogy of reality checks about this. I've written about 9/11 about as much as anybody, and from the time it occurred, obviously, I'm at home and there's some kid noises behind me.
Yeah, if you could make a little bit more noise,
I will.
Maybe a snare drum.
Duly chastise my child for it.
Don't they know who you're talking to?
Exactly. So look, I was there on 9/11, obviously, and it was a defining, kind of searing experience in my life, and I was blessed to be able to write the eulogies for the firefighters and police officers with my team. That was some way to channel the emotions into hopefully something constructive and giving them some sense of comfort. And I wrote an essay about the 9/11 called The Resilient City, which sort of summed up my experience and people seem to read every year and holds up. But every year I've returned to it as a journalist in different capacities. I looked to see actually what happened on the 20th anniversary of Pearl Harbor. I was interested how the country marked that then. Weirdly, I found that JFK was speaking to a union conference in Miami on the day. And which is to say that the country had moved on. And to some extent, that's inevitable. But what I've been worried about and warning about a little bit is what I call 9/11 amnesia. I think there is beyond the normal natural tendency of time moving on, I do believe, as you know, that if you don't learn the lessons of history, you're condemned to repeat it. And I think there's been a tendency to politicize the memory of 9/11 that certainly subsequent actions like the invasion of Iraq did not help. And I think that created one of the real tragedies. I think it also laid the seeds for what we've just seen in Afghanistan. I don't think Afghanistan is in the same place it was before. While the Taliban are back in control, and no one should be naive. I keep seeing these headlines, are they going to be more pragmatic? No, they're going to be the Taliban. Like, come on, don't kid yourself. And I personally probably would have rather kept a residual force in to stabilize the Afghan government for a little longer. I understand the exhaustion. I understand why Biden, after 20 years, felt, he didn't want to keep kicking the can on this. The main feelings I have are, one, if you look back 20 years, the ironies from the Taliban being back in control of Afghanistan to Rudy Giuliani, who I worked for and was proud to have worked for, but has now, disgraced his legacy and himself. There are just all these terrible ironies about where we've been as a country. Right. And how we squandered that national unity. And I think the worst and most difficult legacy is the fact that, in the past we could count on ourselves to unite as a nation after a crisis, a massive attack. And I'm not sure we'd be able to do that in the same way this time around. I think January 6th and the pandemic have shown that. So I do think that President Bush's comments in Shanksville yesterday were important, where he drew a direct line between foreign terrorism and domestic terrorism.
Yeah. On the podcast yesterday, I played it and pretended to be like the Fonz trying to apologize. Remember that? Like I was trying very hard to compliment George Bush because that's hard for me, but had to be done. Yeah.
Had to be done. And, I think the implicit symbolism there is that, we now believe that the Flight 93 was probably aimed for the Capitol. And that's why I think the parallel between the failed attack where the people on the plane took it down in order to save other lives, and the attack on our capital that was self-sustained is so profound. And for me, I think the biggest thing about 9/11, and I did a thing on Al Qaeda today, and I did a thing on the funerals for the firefighters. But the key takeaway that we can never lose sight of is in that moment where we were suddenly attacked. A generation that people said was, decadent and self-involved and all things that had elements of truth, found an elemental courage. And, the firefighters and first responders, they ran into the fire. They went up the stairs and other people were going down. And that is and the people on Flight 93 found a similar spirit, which is to say that courage in a democracy depends upon helping out your fellow human beings, your fellow citizens in times of crisis. And we have been through a period where we've elevated the idea of putting yourself first, no matter what. And that's contrary to the spirit of common good that democracies depend upon.
Yeah.
And so I hope at the very least that people don't lose sight of the power of that example, that they keep it close to them, because it is what societies and civilizations depend upon.
I wonder, the point about if 9/11 were today, or if there were a horrible terrorist attack similar today, what would the American public reaction be? It's a great question, but you think about past generations, and you have such great respect and reverence for history, and you're great at retelling it and reinterpreting things for today's listeners, readers, followers, viewers at CNN. And I struggle with, I'm trying to write a stand-up bit about it, as pathetic as it is, but I struggle with the idea that previous generations of Americans, which I reserve plenty of criticism for several different reasons, but came together to overcome major obstacles. And to some extent, we came together after 9/11 in a lot of different ways. But today, all we need to do to overcome a horrific pandemic is get vaccinated and wear a mask. And it seems like folks are against that because Democrats are for it. It's a weird thing. It's like
it's incredibly weird. And
how do we come together to overcome? This is an easy thing to overcome. We'll bring the shot to you. We'll come to your house. You don't have to get up. It's free.
Yeah. So it's worth looking at the 1918 pandemic, which I had members of my family who died in.
Wow.
And to see that there were, anti-mask leagues, and there were similar, I did a whole thing on the history of anti-vaxxers. And some of the anti-vax stuff from, smallpox outbreaks in the late 1800s and early 1900s are totally similar. The same kind of arguments, the tyranny of the experts, the state and the doctors were telling working people what to do. There's even language of mark of the beast. I mean, some of this stuff is eternal. And the mistakes we make with history is we oversimplify it. And I think it makes it less interesting and less relatable. But you're right to the extent that this is the outright partisan politicization of a pandemic, of masks and vaccinations, when they're readily available, is a kind of a new low in terms of a civil society into democracy being self-defeating. And right now we're in a pandemic of the unvaccinated. I did a reality check today about how we're actually not a 50-50 nation.
Yeah, no, I just shared it. It's the most important point that could probably be made in politics, and you made it so well. So good. Go ahead.
Thank you. No, but it just, we so often buy into this idea that we're deeply, hopelessly, evenly divided 50-50, and it's just not true. It's more 70-30. And you can, and you can see that with vaccinations, with mask mandates, with any number of these policies. Over time, that we have a vocal minority that, in this case of we have around 18%, around a fifth of the population says that they are vaccine resistant. They will not get the vaccine no matter what. At some point, they are putting themselves and their own lives at risk while they're perpetuating the pandemic for the rest of us. They and their families are the ones who are going to suffer, and that is terrible. And we've seen the vaccination rates rise as we've seen the Delta variant hit some of these. Unfortunately, predominantly red states where there's been institutionalized resistance to masks and vaccinations. We've dealt with stuff like this in the past, but it hasn't had the same kind of partisan patina. And that's what's different, is that the rise of social media and hyperpartisan media and the defining yourselves in opposition to the other political party being a core part of your identity, that's different. Probably unlike any time since the Civil War have we had that kind of a partisan identification that people get their back up for. But it is a small minority of the country. There are 27% of the population that have strongly supported Donald Trump at the end of his term. That's his ride or die crew, but it's still a quarter of the country. It's a lot given what we know and what we've experienced, but people shouldn't buy into this idea that it's a 50-50 division as a country. It's not. But we need to recognize this is, you've known me for a long time now, and pretty much I've got one big idea I keep hammering home in all my writing, whether it's history or journalism or columns, which is like hyperpartisanship is killing our country. It is making us dumb. It is making us mean. And if you look at the history of democracies, which we can't take for granted, this kind of self-defeating stuff is what usually sows the seeds for destruction. So we just have to love a little bit more discipline, a little bit more self-respect, and we have to think differently because the social media is a new challenge about how we combat this. But it's mission critical. And if this most recent year between the pandemic and the attack on the Capitol isn't a wake-up call, I don't know what it is.
Yeah, for sure. And, you and I have been talking for years and years, and it's always been a reasonable, thoughtful conversation. And even when we had our old friend Will Kane involved, who's gone far off the deep end. But that brings me to, a question about media. I mean, how often, John, do you think about being critical of people at Fox or any other media outlet? And that must be a difficult choice because I don't want to use the word petty, but you want it to land. You want it to be a good and fair criticism. But the problem I keep telling everybody, in my opinion, is media. I mean, I think even Donald Trump and Republicans are led by media. They always have been. I've always noticed this since I worked at SiriusXM with all those right wingers. I mean, the people on the radio, they come up with the ideas, the complaints, the demands, and then they help these guys get elected. And then these people try to carry them out. And the Republican House especially and Senate has gone crazy because of the ideas that percolate both in think tanks, but especially, I think, through Sean Hannity and now Tucker Carlson, Alex Jones even now.
Yeah. So, I mean, let's even take think tanks almost out of it at this point, although there's a fair point to be made that most of them are nonprofits because they're not supposed to be partisan. They're supposed to be ideological.
Well, that CRT thing, I think, comes out of a think tank, that whole bullshit.
It's a lot of it is, right? But I'm just saying, actually, that they've sacrificed their principles in ways that are questionable from a tax status. But look, there's no question that media and partisan media, hyperpartisan media, the proliferation, the fragmentation of media, plus social media has exacerbated all of this to something well beyond it's ever we've seen before. We've had partisan media a lot in the past, so you don't want to be too Pollyannish about that. But the ecosystem and the way that it's tapped into people's grievances as a badge of their identity is different. And the way that tail does wag the dog is different. And it combines with the rigged system of redistricting and other rules that are in place to make our politics be much more off center than our country actually is. I don't think, first of all, I reject the general thing that it's about the media writ large. It's a specific problem. It's about the rise of hyperpartisan media, disinformation and misinformation. And social media is the new thing that has, if folks are just watching Fox and getting news from their Facebook feeds, I've spoken to friends who are farmers in Iowa who've seen members of their family go off the deep end. And it's inconsistent with the character of their families and their communities and their state historically, right? I mean, Robert Ray, Iowa Republican governor, invited a huge number of refugees after the Vietnam War into Iowa. That's a tradition which is well within living memory that's been almost totally eclipsed. I do think we need to think about how to handle social media because that's a new problem, and just generally the fragmented diet that people are being fed. But it's a terrible mistake to say journalism, media writ large, is to blame for this. It's not. What they try to do is to try to create moral and false equivalencies, right? So that places that do real journalism are equivalent to places that offer only hyperpartisan opinion because they're polarizing for profit. I wrote when Wingnuts, was in some ways the early days of this, where you could start to see that the talking points were being flipped around. They were coming from the media to the politicians rather than vice versa, which they had been. But social media, and I was hosting Reliable Sources the other day, and there's an NYU study from a bunch of researchers who got deplatformed from Facebook for doing their research that found that misinformation got 6 times more clicks than real accurate news.
Oh, God.
So that's a problem. That's a problem for our country and democracy and civil society. Yeah. And we got to deal with that. What I believe is that in the same way that after we were attacked on 9/11 and we felt we had a defining challenge to confront terrorism, which we did. That's a rational response to what occurred at that time. It was the lessons of how we misdid it, I think, are critical for us to learn. But we need to approach the defense of democracy with that same sense of focus.
Such a good point. I absolutely, but it's hard. It's a lot. It seems like the hardest thing in the world. Last question. How do you think the Biden administration has done so far in its almost first year in office?
I think objectively,
given the pandemic,
well.
Yeah.
I mean, look at just judge the performance by the state of the country on Inauguration Day in the wake of an insurrectionist attack on our Capitol, which is unprecedented in our history. Judged by the fact that we had deaths that were spiraling completely out of control without vaccines widely distributed. There was chaos on that front, and an economy that had been propped up. But you had mass unemployment that government action blunted the impact of that to some extent. There is a tendency in our sort of attention span media to constantly sort of play ahead, and certainly the right wing has a very organized chorus within which to create a negative narrative about the Biden administration. And I think they made a mistake in the way they did the Afghan withdrawal. Perfect's never on the menu, people, right? And sometimes it's a matter of opinion. Sometimes it's objectively like that was mishandled. But you have our country's in an infinitely better place than it was 9 months ago, and it can be easy to forget that. Look, the study of history will tell you one thing above everything else. In the presidency, character counts. Character is the most important quality in a president. That's all that really needs to be said about the contrast between these two presidents.
John Avlon, it's been far too long. Thank you so much for joining me. Appreciate it, buddy.
My friend, my brother, it's good to talk to you.
John Avlon, please go let him know that you heard him here on the show. He'll see it. He'll see your tweet at John Avlon, not Avalon, Avlon, A-V-L-O-N. People always get that wrong. Great conversation. Thank you very much, sir. Watch him on CNN every day. His reality checks are always so great. And now I want to share with you my second interview for today. Our second guest joining us, one of your favorites. Of course, he is a constitutional law professor at Georgia State University. He hosts the Supreme Myths podcast, which is the same title as his first book, Supreme Myths, and his latest book, Originalism as Faith. Go get them both. Follow him on Twitter at eSpinSegall. And like I said before, some technical error. I have no idea what happened. I promise I won't let it happen again. I mean, that's what I say, right? Hopefully not again. But we had a good 25-minute or so conversation, and now I'm very happy to share it with you. Learned a lot. Always love his perspective and the history here and so much more. Let's do it right now. Eric Segall, Professor Eric Segall, the Legal Eagle.
Good morning.
You ready to rant?
It's Monday at 9:15 and I'm fucking tired.
Oh, why's that?
No, I'm kidding. Because of there's so much nonsense, Pete, I can't stand it.
I can't find any audio of Amy Coney Barrett.
We don't want it.
Okay. Well, I wanted to ask you about her and Justice Breyer's recent comments.
Yes, I just finished editing a piece. There's an anonymous law professor named Law Prof Blog who is big on Twitter, and he's a friend of mine. And he kind of a lot of people know who he is, but a lot of people don't. And he's writing a funny piece about Breyer that I just edited. That's going to come out tomorrow. That's really funny.
Do you know who he is?
Yeah, we're friends.
Who is he?
I can't tell you.
Well, let's start. I want to start with him then. Breyer?
Sure.
Okay. So Stephen Breyer sat down with Chris Wallace and gave an interview and said a lot of different things about the court, and says he doesn't. I guess one of the big headlines is that he brushed off retirement and said he doesn't plan to die on the Supreme Court. Of course, progressives desperately want liberals him to retire so Joe Biden can appoint somebody. But what are your thoughts on that interview and Breyer in general?
Well, first of all, I wonder if he thinks he's immortal, because how does he know he's not going to die in office? He's 83 years old or something. I don't think a lot of justices think they're going to die in office, and they do. None of that's the point. He goes on. The reason you're watching Stephen Breyer now is not just on Fox News, that interview you just discussed. He has been everywhere. He's been on radio, podcasts, TV. He's doing a Washington Post live thing on Thursday. He is an all media. He's like a one-man media machine. And you know what, Pete? he's against cameras in the court. I want to start right there.
Right.
He testified in front of Congress a few years ago that he think it'd be a bad idea to put cameras in the court. I believe he said because our colleagues might misbehave, to play to the colleagues, meaning his own justices. The hypocrisy of that is insane. My friend, I got to mention him once every time we talk, retired Judge Richard Posner, wrote like 50 plus books, like 55 books. I think Breyer is trying to catch him because this is like, I don't know how many books Breyer has written, but it's a lot. And every time he does it, he goes on a book tour. I don't know if he needs the money. I don't know what his deal is. One thing about Breyer is if you're going to go on all these television stations and media outlets, then don't argue against cameras in the court. But we'll leave that aside. So Breyer is taking the position that court reform is a bad idea. And this is what he said, Pete. And the irony of this, the insanity of this is too much to even, on a Monday morning, is too much to even deal with. Breyer said, look, if the Dems do something to the court now, then Republicans will do it later, and that won't be good for anybody. I'm paraphrasing, but that's what he said. The follow-up question to that should have been, wait a minute. President Obama nominated a Supreme Court justice almost a year before Obama was going to be leaving office, and Mitch McConnell said, no, you can't do that.
Right.
Now, why would Mitch McConnell do that if the court isn't political? That's point A. Point, law professor, he constantly, and Mike Sachs, who used to report on the Supreme Court and now does some other stuff, these guys, whenever Breyer asks one of his 3-paragraph questions, they always make fun of it for good reason. Here's why I'm raising this. Breyer's book is 100 pages long. It's not even a book. I've written law review articles longer than Breyer. And why he has this need to scream to the world that the court is not a political institution is just beyond my imagination. I don't understand it. I can't even give you a theory for it. Well, especially 3 weeks to the day. I believe the Supreme Court term starts 3 weeks from today, first Monday in October. This term, the court has already accepted an abortion case, obviously, a big gun case, and they're probably going to do a big affirmative action case. And they're going to change the law of all 3 of those incredibly important, controversial, political, social policy questions. This term, abortion, gun control, affirmative action. They're going to weigh in on all of those things. Hey, but it's not political. Can't stand it, Pete. Can't stand it.
I can't either. But they can't say that the court's political, can they?
Sonia Sotomayor, 6 months before she was nominated to the Supreme Court, and when she was on the Court of Appeals, gave the second highest court, tied for the second highest court in the land, gave a talk at Berkeley. I don't hold me to Berkeley, but I think it was Berkeley, where she said many things about the court, including a wise Latina woman will often decide cases differently than a white male, which we know is true in the abstract. And then at her confirmation hearing, she walked that back and said it's not what she meant. In 1995, Professor Elena Kagan wrote a law review article in the University of Chicago Law Review, very prestigious, talking about how the nomination process is a charade. I think she said a vapid charade, because no one asks any real questions to these political actors who are going to make political decisions. And then when she testified in front of the Congress when she was nominated for the Supreme Court, the very first question, like one of the first, other than hello, how are you? The first question was, you wrote this as a charade. Do you still think that? And she said, oh, I've evolved on that. Pete, listen to me. And I've been screaming this at you for 12 years. When you give a human being unreviewable power for life or unreviewable power to dissent for life or whatever, you know what I mean? When you give a government official a lot of power, prestige, and authority for life, it takes a human being of unconscionable quality to say, of course, I have both, of course, my personal, political, partisan, ideological feelings are going to affect my job. That's obviously inevitable, but they don't want to say that because they have a job for life that has a lot of power. And again, I'm going to mention him again. I'm sorry, shoot me. If you read a book called How Judges Think by retired Judge Richard Posner, he will explain that when you have open legal questions, we're not talking about criminal trials, and we're not talking about, fact-based inquiries. When we're talking about open legal questions that have no binding precedent, of course, judges are going to decide cases, all things considered, because that's what they do.
Right.
And why the Supreme Court judges can't admit that, I don't know. But one more thing. I tweeted this morning that in 1935, Franklin Delano Roosevelt's Attorney General said to him, "We have got to do something about this. The people in the Supreme Court, they're going to kill us." This has been going on. And then in 1857, the court basically started the Civil War with the Dred Scott decision. The war probably would have happened anyway, but Dred Scott made it much faster. This institution is political to the core. And the fact that Breyer won't admit that is beyond my comprehension.
Well, not only will Breyer not admit it, but I guess what drove you mad and everybody else basically today, yesterday, I should say, I guess it came out, but Amy Coney Barrett gave a speech in Kentucky at I don't know, some hotel named after Mitch McConnell, I guess.
I don't know, but Mitch McConnell was sitting behind her when she gave the speech.
So she, in a speech, she basically said, and the big takeaway, I don't know how long her speech was, but everybody is focused on the same remarks, which is that she said the Supreme Court isn't, quote, a bunch of partisan hacks. Couldn't find any audio anywhere. I guess it probably wasn't. I don't know. They didn't let her. They didn't let them record it. I mean,
she said the court wasn't political too. She said the court wasn't. Or she's afraid the American people are seeing the court as too political. I think is what she said.
She said, "My goal today is to convince you that the court is not comprised of a bunch of partisan hacks."
Well, that's a stupid sentence. I mean, I have an article coming out in a few months, law review article about Justice Roberts, which is as critical an article about him as anyone's ever written. It's called Hubris in Chief. He's not a partisan hack. He's just partisan.
Right.
I mean, the word hack there is the weird one. These are, other than Justice Thomas, these are all really smart people. So let me tell you a story about Justice Barrett that I think will shed some light on this. Law professors have two really big annual conferences. There's one really big one that's very prestigious, and then there's one smaller one that's not as prestigious, but it's really fun, and it's in Florida every summer, and I've told you about it before, and it's a boondoggle, and we go in shorts, and we talk about important stuff. All right. About 5 years ago, before Barrett was nominated to the Seventh Circuit, I was doing a panel on kind of judicial power, judicial independence, that kind of stuff. And I invited her. The reason I invited her is because there are not that many conservative law professors in America. There really aren't. There's like 50 liberal for every one conservative. And there are even fewer conservative women. The number of conservative female law professors in America at that kind of prestigious schools is like 5 or something. Anyway, so I met her once before years ago, but just didn't really talk to her. So I never really knew her in person, but we knew of each other. So I invited her, and she said yes. And then shortly after that, she was nominated to the Seventh Circuit Court of Appeals. So she wrote me back very nicely and said, "Eric, I'm sorry, given that my confirmation hearing is going to be after the conference, I just can't talk about these issues," which is totally fair. I'm not blaming her for that. I would have done the same thing if I were her. But because she is in some ways a classy person, she came to the conference anyway. And she sat in the audience to listen to this panel. And I went up and said hi, and I'm really glad you're here, and I'm sorry you couldn't participate, but I understand. And we did small talk for a few minutes. I have no doubt that had she not been nominated to the Seventh Circuit, she would have been on that panel and talked about how political the court is. Because that's what law professors do. So what happened between the time she was a law professor and the time she was nominated? We know what happened. And then that wasn't to the Supreme Court. That was to the Seventh Circuit. You know what doesn't suck, Pete? Being on the second, there are 12 circuit courts of appeals. They're all tied for the second most important court next to the Supreme Court. Having a life tenure job on that court doesn't suck either. And it changes people. And she doesn't believe a word. There's only one of two possibilities. Either she's lying through her teeth, and so is Breyer, about what they're saying. I don't think that's true. I think Thomas is a liar. I think Scalia was a liar. I don't think they're liars. I don't think Barrett's a liar. I really don't. I think I'm going to mention it for a third time now. I think they suffer from what Judge Posner called cognitive dissonance. Justice Barrett went to Notre Dame Law School, very good law school, one of the few conservative law schools in the country. There's like 5 of them. Notre Dame is one. And it's the most prestigious. But no one from Notre Dame gets to clerk for the Supreme Court. It doesn't have, I imagine the number of clerks on the Supreme Court from Notre Dame in history is very small. She was very conservative in law school. The dean of Notre Dame was a very famous Catholic law professor. He called Justice Scalia and said, you need to hire my student, Amy Barrett.
Right.
She's great and she's conservative. From that moment forward, her trajectory was done. We know where she was heading. She's going to be the woman who probably reverses Roe versus Wade. The idea that her views on abortion aren't politically driven. By political, I don't mean Democrat, Republican Party. I mean views that don't rely on text or history or Supreme Court decisions. In other words, personal views that could be an amalgamation of values, ideology, and politics.
Right.
If she really believes in her heart that her opposition to Roe isn't something separate from the law, I don't believe she believes that. So the theory is she's been taught from the beginning how judges should act. She was taught it as a law student. She was taught it as a law clerk. She was taught it as a law, and this gets beaten into their heads. So when they get there, they actually think that their priors, their values, their political predilections are in the background. They keep them in the background, and they don't really impinge their decisions. And you and I know that is completely 100% false. So it's just crazy. It's crazy. And by the way, Roosevelt was more frustrated by the Supreme Court than we are today times 10. We were in the middle of a Great Depression. The Supreme Court had struck down a bunch of New Deal legislation. The country people were jumping out of, it was awful. And Roosevelt couldn't get his New Deal passed because of the Supreme Court. So eventually, after the landslide election of 1936, he went on radio, which was the equivalent of TV. I'm sorry, I'm ranting. He went on the radio, which is the equivalent of TV, and said, we have to save the country from the Supreme Court. And he did. And he tried to do his court packing, and then the court changed its mind, and then he got 5 nominations, and then it was all over. If the Democrats win in 2024, which I don't think they will, but if they do, they need to take that election as the same mandate that Roosevelt did and do something about this heinous institution. They just do. And by the way, I'm so old, I remember when Republicans would complain the court was too political.
Right,
remember those days?
Right.
Remember those days?
Yeah. Well, activist judges.
Yes. This term is, you and I are going to be talking a lot because we already have guns and abortion, and we're probably going to have affirmative action.
Right. Well, are vaccine mandates constitutional?
According to me or according to the Supreme Court?
Both.
Well, as far as the Supreme Court goes, there's a lot of different that's a question that's too broad to answer. This Supreme Court will always find that that if somebody wants to object religiously, they can. That's a done deal. This court will always say that. But as far as with Biden's plan about the employers, and all that stuff,
yeah,
and OSHA. So Pete, the honest truth about that is it's really complicated. It's not just constitutional law; it's also administrative law. But none of that really matters. It'll be legal or not, depending how terrible the COVID, the pandemic gets. If the pandemic gets better, and we're on the final stages of it, then I think the court will be not sympathetic. If the pandemic gets worse, which I think will happen in the fall, and if this country is really in a crisis, it's hard for me to imagine even this Supreme Court getting in the middle of that.
Just to be clear, the country is in a crisis with the pandemic with, 1,500 people a day dying.
No, I understand, but they don't view it. I don't think the conservative justices view it that way. It has to get much worse before which is insane, I know, but they have to view it that way. Generally speaking, in crisis, the court stays out of things as a general problem. Not always. Dred Scott's an exception, but generally speaking, they stay out of it. But anyone who tells you today that they know what Biden's vaccination plan, whether it's legal or not, reach for your wallet. Because first of all, the plan's not been released. Second of all, the general contours of the plan are vague. Third of all, it's so wrapped up in complicated administrative law. Pete, I've studied administrative law. I'm not an expert in it, but I've studied it. I know a lot about it. I would not even opine on the administrative law. I'll tell you someone who did. Jonathan Adler, who I disagree with 99% of the time, who you've had on your show. He and I fought over King versus Burwell, the second Obamacare case. He's an administrative law expert, and he wrote a thing for Reason.com, and people should read it because on this issue, Jonathan is fair. Not always fair, but on this issue, he is. And it's complicated. Like there's no pat. If anyone gives you a pat answer, just that they're wrong. They don't know. It's too much unknown. That's the truth.
All right. Finally, what's going to happen with the Texas abortion law in terms of the Supreme Court? What's next with that?
Yeah, I'm doing your old friend Rick Under's radio show on that in a few hours.
Oh, cool. Tell him I said hello.
I will. There's no soundbite answer to that one. I'll tell you that. So what I assume is going to happen, there will be a test case in Texas state court, you would think, right? At some point, someone's going to sue somebody and try to get the $10,000. When that happens, the Texas state judge who decides that case has taken an oath to uphold the Constitution. As of this moment, that law is clearly, facially, obviously unconstitutional. So if I'm not saying it should be or shouldn't be, I'm just saying it is. There's just no question. And by the way, I've heard no one disagree with that, conservative or liberal. Even the 5 Supreme Court justices who wouldn't stay the law said the merits are very troubling. They're just not getting involved for procedural reasons, which was bullshit, but that's what they said. Right. But even they said it's very troubling. That state court judge should strike it down. And then the Court of Appeals in Texas should affirm that. And then the Texas Supreme Court should affirm that. The suit the United States filed against Texas in Texas is so complicated and so hard and has so many uncertainties that anyone who predicts on that is also talking out of their heads, except for one thing. On the law, I don't have a good answer for you. What's going to happen in reality is the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals, the federal court, which has been issuing anti-abortion decisions for years that have been struck down by the Supreme Court, including Justice Roberts, several times. They're going to, of course, say the United States can't sue. And the Supreme Court's going to agree with that, too. This Texas law, if you read Steve Vladeck, who's been on your show, who's an expert, and you read others, they are saying the sky is going to fall because this abortion law could be extended to everything. Let's say a liberal state wanted to pass a law that says you're not allowed to own a gun, even a handgun, which the Supreme Court has protected. You're not allowed to own a handgun, but we're not going to enforce that. We're going to give a civil lawsuit to private citizens to enforce this, and they get $10,000 if they prove you've owned a handgun in violation of our law. You and I both, what would the Supreme Court do with that, do you think? What's your answer? I mean, it's an obvious question. If that was the law, that if you turn someone in for having a gun, you get $10,000. They
would reject it.
They would strike it down
because it's a gun. If it's a 5-4, I mean, I think.
But let me just extrapolate from that. That's a terribly bad law professor word. On any issue but abortion, the court is going to protect its own turf.
Right.
So the Texas law will never be extended beyond abortion. I can tell. I mean, they may try, but the Supreme Court would strike it.
Right.
But because that would take the Supreme Court's power away. And people with life tenure and unreviewable power don't like their power being taken away. By the way, that's the other reason why Breyer's doing what he's doing, because he doesn't want the Congress to step in and do something about the court. I mean, that's really what Breyer's doing. I should have said that earlier. Breyer does not want the Supreme Court as an institution to be weaker. That's one of the reasons he's doing what he's doing. Barrett is doing it just out of kind of idiotic loyalty to Mitch McConnell. But by the way, Justice Roberts did this a couple of years ago too. Almost all of them do. Even Ginsburg did this. You know who's not done it? Sotomayor. Because she doesn't believe it, Pete. And she said she didn't believe it 6 months before she found it.
It being what specifically? What?
Okay, so people often mistake my views to be the Supreme Court is a partisan institution that is political all the way down. That's not my view. That has never been my view. I say this a million times. I keep getting misquoted about it. My view is what the Supreme Court is a hybrid legal political institution where in cases they don't care very much about, they act like judges most of the time. But in cases they care about, which is almost all the con law cases that we read about in the New York Times. Let's go through it. Abortion, affirmative action, gun control, campaign finance reform, separation of powers, presidents being subpoenaed, war powers, everything that all the stuff we care about.
Well, folks, I'm afraid you're going to absolutely kill me and be super disappointed because, again, a technical difficulty cut that conversation off. I actually didn't realize it till I was putting the show together tonight. All of a sudden, it just stopped. Continue to have this hardware issue. I'm trying to get it fixed, but we did get a good 25 minutes or so from Segall. We did about another 10 or 15 minutes, really, and I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. It's so frustrating. I will get to the bottom of it. I apologize. It was also one of the only times I didn't have a backup recording going, so that won't happen again. I apologize, especially to those that of you who pay for this podcast when there are technical issues, but it is just me in a shed trying to figure it all out, so I appreciate your patience. And write me your hate mail and your complaints. standupwithpete@gmail.com. But that's all I've got for you today. Thank you very much for listening. Thank you very much to John Carroll for singing us out each and every day. Thank you for the feedback, the email, the love, the support. I'll see you Thursday night, if not sooner. And that's it. I love you. You're never alone. If you want to check in on the Discord platform, if you're a subscriber, check that out if you haven't already. And I'm out. Talk to you tomorrow. Take it away, John.
Stand up. You gotta stare the devil straight in the eye. We got to let him know it's his turn to go. See it clear when all you hear is a lie. Don't get up off of your butt, get down off of your fence. And even if it ain't a very friendly audience, well, they'll begin to listen when you start making sense. And you stand up, stand up. No need to point your rifle to defend your town. Just stand up, stand up. You know they can't deny you what you're laying down. Boy, you better stand up, stand up. Show your face of every color, yellow, black, red, and brown. She's the place where every lost child will finally be found. There's only one thing to do before we stand our ground, and that's stand up, stand up. Well, the founding fathers saw a land for all. They had to stand up, they had to stand up. They had a keen imagination for a crystal ball, drawing all the plans of stand up. But all they had to go on was the time they were in, with other causes for laws, and since they weren't even sin, they knew that change was gonna come before the change could begin. They had to stand up. All right, they had to stand up. We got to stand up. We got to look the devil square in the eye. We got to let him know it's his time to go, and make it clear when all we hear is a lie. Why you lying awake wondering where the money all went? It'll be the cost of freedom that'll go unspent. You can see him flee the scene of that experiment if you stand up. All right, we got to speak up, we got to reach up and raise your voice in every way you know how. Don't be toes up, you got to show up. Ain't no better time to do it but now. No need to pledge allegiance to no wanton tribe. Rise up, show obedience to the voice inside, and listen well and it'll tell you not to run and hide.